I'm now pleased to kick off part two of the training. So the part two, following the transmission planning fundamentals that we just heard, we'll be focusing on state action planning for transmission. And we have three sets of speakers coming up, three different panels. The first one will be on the topic of examples of state energy office engagement in transmission planning. And just so you know, the format of these subsequent sessions will be that you'll hear from your peers in other states who will share their experiences on various transmission planning activities within their state. They'll have 10 minutes of presentation from each speaker, followed by a non-recorded roundtable discussion with all of you. Please also note that following this session, we'll have a 15-minute break. So if those of you do want to get up and stretch your legs, that will be an opportunity coming up. So I am pleased to introduce our speakers now. Paul Holloway serves as Emergency Planning and Energy Analyst with the Massachusetts Department of Energy Resources. Ethan Tremblay serves as Policy and Markets Program Manager with the Maine Department of Energy Resources. And Tim Kowalczyk serves as Research Director and Emerging Technology Strategist with the Utah Office of Energy Development. So we're thrilled to have all of you here. And without further ado, I will ask Paul to join us. Great. Welcome, Paul.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Paul Holloway here from Massachusetts Department of Energy Resources. Just going to give a quick overview of the Clean Energy Transmission Working Group report and process that we undertook here in Massachusetts. So if we go back to 2022, 3 years in the Wayback Machine, the legislature issued the climate law, passed the climate law, or it's called an Act to Drive Clean Energy and Offshore Wind. And really, as part of that climate law, they required the Department of Energy Resources to work with the Department of Public Utilities to assess and report to the legislature. The general court is how it's referred to in the legislation, on any necessary transmission infrastructure upgrades required to support deployment of clean energy projects that may interconnect to the Commonwealth for the benefit of our residents or for the region. And that was to include offshore wind, but not exclude other renewable resources such as onshore wind or DERs. There were 5 key deliverables that we were required to hit as part of our report back to the legislature. They asked us to examine in-state transmission upgrades and regional transmission upgrades necessary to accommodate our clean energy requirements here in Massachusetts. So Massachusetts has a decarbonization goal of 85% from 1990 levels in 2050. And that is a law that has been passed, so we are required to hit that. They asked us to provide recommendations on actions or initiatives that the ISO could undertake here in New England, FERC, or other regional or state entities that could be helpful or necessary to fund or approve those upgrades. They asked us to do a cost-benefit analysis to identify regulatory or legal challenges to obtaining tariff approvals to accommodate those clean energy projects. Asked us to also assess and review cost allocation measures adopted in other jurisdictions with the goal of spreading transmission upgrade costs equitably across our ratepayers here in Massachusetts and New England. And last, if that wasn't enough, they asked us to give special attention to equitable allocation of costs and to share costs and benefits with populations here in the Commonwealth as well as the region so that we could better come up with policy recommendations for equitable recovery of costs. So that was what they required of us. We leveraged some other work that was also going on in parallel with our Clean Energy Transmission Working Group. The legislature laid out what the membership was to be of the Clean Energy Transmission Working Group, and it was to be chaired by the DPU and the DOER commissioner. So DPU chair and DOER commissioner. And then there were 17 members in total. That included a representative from the Attorney General's office, The co-chairs of the Committee on Telecommunications, Utilities, and Energy, Representative Roy and Senator Barrett, appointed themselves to the committee as well. And then there were 12 appointees from the governor, and those represented everything from Associated Industries of Massachusetts to the Massachusetts Taxpayers Foundation, the Consumer Law Center, the Acadia Center, Northeast Clean Energy Council, the IOUs here in Massachusetts, so um, Eversource and National Grid. And then it also included the solar industry, offshore wind industry, an economist with knowledge of the electric transmission distribution system, as well as a municipal representative from the municipal electric companies. We held a total of 9 public meetings across 6 months, so we had a pretty rapid turnaround. We started our work in July. The report was due in December. I should also add that the transmission working group was staffed by existing folks both at DOER and DPU. So there was myself assigned to the working group, as well as a counterpart at the Department of Public Utilities. And we largely worked with the committee members to tackle the various topics that you'll see in that report across the course of 9 public meetings. So we handled presentations each meeting on various topics from jurisdictional authority, transmission system planning, distribution system planning, consumer costs, cost allocation, offshore wind transmission, interconnection, advanced transmission technologies, that includes GETS, and siting and permitting. So we covered all those topics across 9 public meetings with a variety of experts as well as committee members that we asked to come in. And there was opportunities for public comment. We developed a website. Presentation materials are available on the website. As well as notes from each meeting that we captured. So, as I said, the 2 chairs of the CETWG was the chair of the DPU and the DOER commissioner, and then each agency provided a staffer, largely to support the work of the group. And then we came up with a variety of recommendations that are well detailed in the report. I won't get into all of those here, but those are available. I think that some of the drivers on how the CETWG it ended up in the legislation, I think date back to the NESCO's vision statement that they issued back in 2020 that called for some fundamental changes in the region in terms of wholesale electricity market design, long-term transmission system planning, and governance. So I think that informed Rep. Roy and Senator Barrett's decision to seek out the establishment of this group and ask for this report. And then in parallel with this, we also had the ISO's 2050 transmission study. And then we also had the 2023 DOE National Transmission Needs Study that came out. So I think all of those things were informing this work and the decision that the legislature made that they were going to ask us to develop this report with recommendations on long-term transmission planning here in the Commonwealth. So that's a little bit of background. During the discussion, we can get into some of our recommendations that we had. But really, a big driver here was our decarbonization efforts, the recognition that we've spent between 2002 and 2023, a little over 15 billion in the region on transmission infrastructure upgrades and really largely eliminated congestion costs. But we still had additional transmission needs that were out there to accommodate renewable resources and meet our decarbonization goals that 5 of the 6 New England states have, looking out to 2050. And so I think that we had a fairly large scope of work to tackle in this report over the course of about 5 months when we think about it. And there was a bunch of things that informed that work, both leading up to the legislation being passed, as well as the group's work. And again, we'll talk through that during the discussion. But that's a little bit of background in terms of how it was structured, the membership, and the charge to the committee. And then in terms of staffing, it was probably about half of my time during those 5 or 6 months, and about half of the time for the Director of Federal and Regulatory Affairs over at the DPU. Um, Considering we both work in our respective policy and planning shops at the time. We were also supported by the DOER's Deputy Commissioner, as well as staff from the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, which had recently stood up a regional and federal affairs division, and we had staff support from them as well. To a lesser level, but they were highly involved as well and were really integral to helping us develop the final report. So that's a little bit of background. We'll talk more as we get into the discussion.
Thank you, Paul. Yes, and we'll save your questions, please, for following the third speaker. So we're going to turn it over to Ethan Tremblay with Maine, Policy and Markets Program Manager with Maine Department of Energy Resources. So Ethan.
Thanks, Catherine, and thanks, NASEO, for convening us all here. It's been I've learned a ton in just the first hour and really excited to be part of this conversation with you all. I am Ethan Tremblay. I'm with the Maine Department of Energy Resources. Some of you may have known us as the Governor's Energy Office up until earlier this year when we changed to a permanent cabinet level agency. So I can talk a little bit about that in the context of transmission planning in a moment. I thought it'd be helpful to take kind of a big step back and reflect on how we've gotten into transmission planning in Maine over the past 7 or so years. It started really for a variety of reasons. I would say some of them are structural. So just to give you a little sense of the transmission system in Maine, which is not usually what people think about when they're thinking about Maine. They're usually thinking about lobster rolls or pine trees or otherwise. But we are mostly in the ISO New England system, which is the regional grid operator for New England. However, a portion of our state in the northeast section is not. It's actually the only, as far as we know, the only portion of the lower 48 that's not electrically connected directly to the rest of the United States. It's connected only to New Brunswick. We refer to that as the Northern Maine system. Northern Maine, interestingly enough, also has some of the highest renewable energy potential in the region, although it's not directly electrically connected to the rest of the region. And so that's been an area of focus for us for several years, how to unlock those resources. But anyway, over the past 5 to 7 years, I would say a number of factors, including just general economic changes, retirement of some legacy generators that had been in Maine, both in Northern Maine and in the ISO New England region, rising electric rates, some policy directives, including our ambitious greenhouse gas reduction requirements, which were put into law in 2019, as well as some economic development initiatives where we really tried to focus on redeveloping legacy industrial sites, particularly former forest products like paper mills that have closed in the past 15 years or so, that have resulted in some significant transmission capacity that's available for new economic development. So all those kind of broader factors have been on our mind at the State Energy Office, and then also specific events, like one particular project, the New England Clean Energy Connect, which is an HVDC line connecting Quebec to the rest of New England through a route in Western Maine, which was proposed and announced in shortly before Governor Mills took office, but became sort of a lengthy process with a fair amount of public interest and backlash, a statewide referendum, a Supreme Court case, and so forth. So specific projects also have driven some of our interest in longer term transmission planning. I want to talk a little bit about this RFP that we recently put out, which is for some consultants to support us with the stakeholder process. I won't bore you too much with like the consultant selection process. We're a state, we have to go through an RFP and it takes a while to do that. But we're really excited to be leading a long-term transmission planning stakeholder group. This was created as a result of legislation passed earlier this year, Resolves Chapter 57. It directs our department to convene both state agencies and stakeholders. So there's a list of state agency representatives that our legislature wanted to see included. That's folks from our Public Utilities Commission, the Consumer Advocate or Office of the Public Advocate, the Department of Transportation, the Department of Environmental Protection, some of the other permitting agencies that are implicated in transmission development, as well as private sector and other stakeholders, including our utilities, folks with expertise in real estate and assessment, folks with expertise in electrical engineering, land use, and some other issues. So really bringing together a pretty diverse group of folks to help us develop a long-term transmission strategy for the state. This is we see it as our opportunity to lay out some next steps in addition to the various activities that are underway already today, which I'm happy to talk more about. That process, so the legislature also prescribed a scope for that study. It includes a lot of topics not dissimilar, and I was just skimming again the Massachusetts study because the link was in the chat at the end of Paul's comments. And so a similar set of scope items around processes for siting and permitting, evaluation of existing planning that happens at the regional level through the ISO with input from the states, as well as what happens at the local utility level. There's a strong interest in siting decision-making and public engagement around that. And so I think we'll have a focus on best practices from around the country for ensuring that folks have, appropriate notice and opportunity to make themselves heard, and also that we have processes that are meaningful and ultimately lead to projects that have real benefits to the communities that they will serve. We're also going to look at various what I consider to be siting, but pretty interesting aspects of siting, like utilizing existing right-of-ways, opportunities for co-location and transmission corridors, or transportation corridors, excuse me, or existing transmission corridors, railway rights-of-way, other kind of co-location opportunities that might be helpful to developing infrastructure in the long term. And then a heavy focus on innovation and emerging technologies. Some folks in the grid enhancing technologies realm will be quick to remind us that some of those technologies have fully emerged and are ready to go. And so we want to make sure that we're not just looking at things that might be on the horizon, but looking at technologies that are available and proven in other jurisdictions, but maybe not yet adopted here to the level that may be beneficial otherwise. So that's our long-term transmission strategy. I think it's just a quick reflection on that, and I'm happy to talk more about this in the Q&A afterwards. I think it's a really great example of the work that a state energy office can do convening different stakeholders, both our colleagues from other state agencies who are very well versed in permitting or siting or transportation planning or other topics that touch transmission development, but maybe aren't thinking about it all of the time, or bringing people together can really create those opportunities to lead to better outcomes for our constituents, which is really what we're focused on at the end of the day. Another effort that I wanted to touch on briefly is the Northeast Collaborative. So to give you the background here, and I see colleagues from other states who are participating in that as well, and so look forward to chatting about this with everyone when we get to the discussion portion. But by way of background, it was back in 2023, which feels so long ago in some ways. A group of states in the Northeast sent a request to the Department of Energy to convene and support a multi-state initiative, which has ended up being called the Northeast States Collaborative on Interregional Transmission. This was, as far as we could tell, a first in the nation effort to explore mutually beneficial opportunities to increase the flow of electricity, which generally happens over transmission, between the three different planning regions in the Northeast. And there was a emphasis included in that on offshore infrastructure for a variety of reasons, including states with offshore wind goals, as well as the rather densely populated nature of the Northeast. So following that in 2024, Maine joined a memorandum of understanding with 10 Northeast states to establish the collaborative. I can read you the whole list, but maybe we'll do that in Q&A. In any case, the MOU puts forward a framework for us to continue to work together on interregional issues. One area of particular focus is the development of common technical standards for HVDC systems, which we can talk about more if folks would like, although I'm not an engineer and always learn more in those conversations than I feel like I offer. But it's an increasingly important topic, not just in the US, but worldwide. And in some senses, this topic has been worked on for a great deal of time in Europe already, and there's much we can learn from what folks have already established over there. But I kind of think of it as, it's really nice that when you buy some electric appliance and you bring it home, you know that you can plug it in. And wouldn't that be nice when you were buying multi-million-dollar large-scale electric grid components as well? So another area where states getting together and coordinating can help drive better outcomes for our constituents. So those are the topics I wanted to touch on, and I'm happy to go deeper on any of that in discussion with folks. And once again, thanks to NASEO for bringing us together.
Fantastic, Ethan. That was a great overview. And now we'll turn to Tim Kowalczyk with Utah to share the perspective from his state. And after his presentation, we will stop recording and have a discussion. Take it away, Tim.
Yeah, and I brought slides. So apologies in advance, but you'll get some extra material here. We can go ahead to the next slide. And one more. Okay, so yeah, I've been asked to touch on quite a few things, so I'll try to be pretty quick with a lot of this to get to how we're looking at advanced technologies. But Utah does have a relatively unique energy office that's probably worth calling out. Similar to many of you, we do have programs and grant side, I would assume. That's tax infrastructure credits, something like rural EV infrastructure. There's an education effort in there. We have a STEM Fest series. And then there's my team. So the research in-house expertise on energy issues and guiding policy or initiatives. Basically, if it's technical and challenging, that is probably me. We are sort of the in-house catch-all technical expertise from anything from transmission to energy markets to geothermal to nuclear. XYZ, take your pick. Operation Gigawatt, if that's been in the news and you've come across that, that's us. We do publications, we do some policy stuff. And a couple more unique things within nuclear specifically. We have a energy research center, a research lab effectively, which is pretty unique and really cool, but not topical to this conversation, but I'd love to talk about it. They're doing a lot of stuff with nuclear. And then we have some legislative call-outs as well within the office that are sort of standalone entities. Specifically on nuclear, that's the legislature's big interest right now. But those are all sort of housed within the office, so we have quite a bit of reach into many things. And then next slide. Okay, so to talk about where do we weigh in on transmission? Because so at the upfront, we don't do siting. We're not regulators. So how can we play? We play in policy. That's the office's true role here. Our legislature has been pretty good at setting boundaries that allow us the scope to go and do interesting, cool things. A couple of calls I specifically want to make for people who might want to be pushing some of this stuff. We are called out in legislation as the resource for energy and mineral development to fulfill the governor's objectives. We're the ones implementing a state energy policy. The state energy policy is defined. I'll get to that in just a minute. And the last one, and a strategic energy plan, which is part of that state energy policy. The most important chunk of this to me is in legislation, there is a call out that other state agencies have to collaborate and coordinate with us. It's nice to have that. I would love to be nice and just collaborate naturally, but to have the actual legislative backing is awesome. So they are mandated to give us data in forming our strategic energy plan. And if we go to the next slide, we can see the strategic energy plan touches on a ton of stuff. So this is also called out in legislation. Here's all the things that I am supposed to be looking at. They want us to be using industry standard data to be predicting and methodology, so like modeling, to look at energy demand. They want us to be demand forecasting, to look at operational stuff. They want us to be incorporating academic research and national lab partnerships. They want us to be doing an optimization of the economics. They want us to be looking at innovation that is specifically called out within infrastructure and within technology, potential for resource, potential for workforce, potential for actual hard infrastructure, transmission and pipelines, a budget for doing all of this. We're mandated to weigh in on federal issues. These are all the things that we are sort of mandated to touch on when we form the strategic energy plan, which gives me a ton of leeway in the conversations that I can hold, specifically with the caveat that, like, yeah, other agencies are supposed to work with us and we're supposed to be the facilitator. And I think state energy offices are a good place to do this facilitating. And we can hit the next slide. And one more. So now I'll go into transmission. How do we weigh in on transmission? Given that we don't do transmission, right? The most relevant one recently, historically, has been there was a working group in 2019 within the Senate. Well, outside the Senate, apologies. There was Senate funding in 2019 that said, let's go study Utah's electrical grid and look at constraints specifically. That was the scoping. And then that led to the next year a working group forming to give input into that. That included, I believe, legislature. That included OED was the leader. That included Rocky Mountain Power and PacifiCorp. Something they hit on for Utah specifically is PacifiCorp serves like 85% of our load. So we are like a truly vertically integrated utility. They are pretty much the only name of the game. So if something's getting built in here, it is on their system almost certainly. And then the vendor that came out of that from the competitive process on getting this study funded was Energy Strategies. If you're familiar with West Tech in the West, that is the same group. So I put a bunch of links in here. I don't know if we're going to share slides. I'm totally fine with it. But there's a Utah transmission study. It's on our website. That is sort of a first pass of what you might get out of one of these things. And it did a couple of good things. It looked at constraints. That was your scoping. It looked at what is being planned by the IRP process and what extra transmission build out do you need. And then the last big one I want to really highlight is the economic value and state investment. That is critical to talking to local communities. Because I think a lot of times people just see transmission in the background and you go, okay, well, what's the benefit to me? Jobs, power, growth. It's huge benefits. Quantifying them is really difficult. And that's a fun conversation that I've been sort of navigating. The output it led to, I pulled just one image from it. There's plenty in there. But I've essentially identified cut planes is what they're identified in the study as. These are areas where within the existing transmission and within what we know about IRP planning and potential for resource development, here are areas that are going to become congested. And correspondingly, we have seen a good chunk of investment north-south within the state. There is also east-west. There's plenty of merchant lines in the area, but it was framed as here's the potential need, and then here's where you might actually want to look at congestion. And I do think it has had some way to drive those conversations, even though we don't do regulation. And then internally within the office, we're still using values and estimates today. It's not that old. The demand projections are certainly completely out the window. So realistically, I'm looking at doing another one of these studies, specifically looking at a modern grid is my current framing with it. And that will look at grid enhancing technologies and their role specifically on how they're going to interface with energy markets, which is, I think, an interesting conversation. And the office does a bunch of other publications on this stuff. We have funding to do this through our legislature pretty much every year. Some of this is internal expertise as well. We've got some stuff on energy markets. That's an old study also through Energy Strategies. We have a gasoline report we just put out that sort of talks about gasoline in the area. We've got effectively a white paper series on nuclear energy that I'm going to expand with the team to cover other topics. But we do think getting the state's opinion out on some of this stuff is good, and we back it with as much data as we can. Next slide, please. Okay, so that's a bit of the study side of it. There's probably a future one coming. Kindly, please keep tuned. It'll be public whenever we do it. I know I'll talk about policy. I've got two examples here. There's the one that's super topical to the call, but this is also one that we did not do a ton of formative work for. So this will certainly depend on how you guys are interacting with your legislature. I am mandated to push policy. I have to push policy. That's specifically called out in code. So that's kind of interesting because I can't force someone to do policy. So we weigh in a lot on the front end with as much data as we can. If we have a suggestion, we come and we say, hey, and that's effectively that nuclear white paper series I mentioned, which says, here's what we think the state needs to do, given that you guys want to do a nuclear ecosystem. That's the framing they're using. Great. We're going to think really far into the future and say, okay, you should probably start talking about waste now and siting now, because those are going to be the topical conversations when you just want to get a reactor on the ground. That's a bit of the role we play within policy if it's sort of external. And I'll give an example of that just after this. This is one where the legislature decided to do this independently, but we have been providing data and perspective on the value that ATTs and GETs can provide. So it does a couple of things that are, I think, useful. It defines a range of technologies to be considered as advanced transmission technologies. But it has a specific call out for ones that are in sort of the nomenclature, but it also has a call out to general things that increase capacity, efficiency, or reliability of transmission infrastructure, which sort of future proofs it, right? The definition is not super specific, which I think is actually useful. It mandates, and then here's the actual meat of it. Not that that Rocky Mountain Power, our local arm of PacifiCorp, couldn't do ATTs. but it clarifies and mandates that if the electric utility they have to evaluate them in their IRP planning process specifically. It also calls out the general rate case, but it really leans on the IRP process. And to look at the economic viability of using some of these things anytime they are looking at expanding the transmission system. So what it is not specific on what that's supposed to look like, and that's a bit of how the office is weighing in right now. But I'll finish. The flip side of this is get from that analysis. The utility provides that analysis in their IRP. The Public Service Commission is then supposed to encourage that development, but then is supposed to give cost recovery on prudently incurred costs. This is legislated. What the analysis has to look like is where we are now. So this is recent legislation. The next bill I'm about to mention has taken all of our Public Service Commission's time. So they've not had any time to work on this, to my understanding. We at the office certainly have opinions on ATTs and GETs and want to promote their use. So we're weighing in with technical expertise to them, not telling them what they should do. That'd be a little inappropriate, but telling them here is the viability of a metric you might want to use. Here's what you might want to be looking for in your analysis. This is what we think is a middle ground between what Rocky Mountain Power could provide and gives you the data you need to do the analysis. Because we have heard that sometimes that data connection is not as rigorous as it could be. And the people making the decisions on rate recovery are not getting all the information they need. So we want to be sure the metrics provided actually make sense to everybody. That's where we currently are. And then next slide, I will give, I think I'm at time already, so I'll hit this really quickly. There is the other side of policy that we've done where this was super led by us with a ton of upfront research, but just to give the scope of things we can touch on, this looks at effectively somewhat deregulating what the vertically integrated utility we have here, specifically for large loads, which is really a transmission conversation. How can I connect to these large loads without actually putting demand onto the grid and impacting everyone and socializing the costs? A solution to that would be making them be off grid. This is what this enables. You can be off grid, you can be on grid, you can be hybrid. Most importantly, you don't have to own your own generation. And I will end myself here, but there's a ton of discussion that could happen around here. But anyways, I prepped way too much content. Sorry.
Do not apologize. It's fantastic content, and we are really excited about all of the things that you raised, and